on identity, and this is for your parents. They were excited and gave me a whole lot of things to actually ask you. But
let me tell you, Hloni, I'm very excited and I'm very nervous because I'm coming in cold. So I am ill prepared in that I have not read these questions. So this is me flying off cold today. So it's good to be with you, Hloni.
absolutely, and I think it actually makes it nice because now, hey, it's not scripted, and so whatever we hear today is honestly Jacqui's opinion. When we decide to go on this journey of discovering who we are, it does not always fit into the narrative of the community that we grow up in.
Yeah.
You know, and how did you navigate that? Because I can imagine, from being this good girl and to becoming this troublemaker.
Yeah, you're a product of what you grow up in, and you're trying to balance it. You're trying to figure it out, So it's like, definitely, I have a very vocal family, a very expressive family. One thing we were always allowed to do is express our opinions. So we were allowed to express. And so maybe I was known as the radical person. I never felt radical. I never felt radical enough. I never felt it, So, it's kind of like, and also ultimately the cause does not, sometimes the cause can actually, deviate from the real essence of a person's humanity. You can believe in a cause, but actually dehumanize people even in that process. And I suppose for me it was, well, maybe the church is the place that can humanize us, that can actually make us be the expression of the body of Christ, made in all diversity. And so, that's been part of my journey.
And if you were parenting someone now like Jacqui Rivers, let's say you put yourself, what are some decisions that you'd make in terms of like, would you allow them to take that risk? Would you allow them to go on a risky path of realizing their own identity?
100%. Like, I think that, what I love about 21st century and the Gen Zs, the millennials, I love the courage of young people.
Sure.
I feel that,
Absolutely.
I don't come from a silenced generation, but a silent generation, but a silenced generation.
Sure.
I think we carry a lot of silence and we carry a lot of secrets. I think that South Africa carries secrets. I'm of the generation that I think still carries secrets, secrets of the shame of our past in this country, and just secrets like, and trauma, quite a bit of trauma. I would allow my children even now to be more radically informed. I think what I love about young people is like, sometimes I go to synod and I listen to the debates, and I love actually sometimes like cruising through various social media platforms. It's good to see the radical footprints of young people. And I think that, I wouldn't silence that. Sometimes it's irritating beyond.
Sure.
But I feel like we have to hear the voice of young people. So it's good to be with you, Hloni.
Absolutely, and I think it actually makes it nice because now, hey, it's not scripted, and so whatever we hear today is honestly Jacqui's opinion. But Jacqui, before we even go into these questions, Jacqui Rivers was a teenager at some point. She had to make some choices around identity. Can you give us a rough picture of what that journey would have looked like?
So, for sure. I was a teenager in Germiston. I went to Germiston High School, and I matriculated in 87, which meant I was a teenager in those 87, 6, 5, 4, 3, kind of that era of time. It was really in the thick of apartheid. It was a rough time in the life of our country. I had been socialized by my grandmother, and she'd often shared with me some of the struggles that she had seen. So she came here from Wales as a young girl. And she'd spoken around the violation of human rights. And so she'd conscientized us as a family when we were young. And so I constantly find myself, and this is real in my teenage years, feeling very uncomfortable about the way things were. Like nothing ever felt right for me. One of my first memories was in 1976 as a young girl. I was just in grade 1 at that point. I remember feeling like really disturbed by things not being right in our country. I didn't quite understand what it was. I just knew things weren't right.
Sure.
So as a teenager, I think I started to develop some radical conscientize things. I eventually stopped singing in school. I was appointed to go on various leadership camps, and I then went, and then I stopped singing the national anthem.
Sure.
In the school, and there were a few little things that I started to do as a young person. At that stage, I remember I started to work for various political parties. There was, you couldn't work for political. I wasn't, none of my broader family was involved politically, but I kind of trundled off at one point with the PFP, kind of just started to see how the politics. So certainly politics for me was something that, I was conscientized about at a young age. And one of the things I always do is I just, as I said, I refused to sing the national anthem. Sure. I got into a bit of trouble for that at school. So, I think that I was, as a teenager, I was always a good girl,
Sure.
But I had a heart for justice when I was young.
But how was that?
So, I don't know, actually. So in my matric year, I waitressed always, and there was a place I went to the Germans. Eventually, I found myself in a Methodist school, in a Methodist church. So I started off in a Presbyterian church, and I found myself in a Methodist church. And there was like a stirring inside of me, and I decided I was going to go and study law, and I wanted to do human rights law. And in my matric year, there was a squatter camp just outside of in Germiston called
Sure.
Dickatoli.
Yes.
And so what I did is I decided that I was going to start a church in Dickatoli, and I found a school, like a little hall there, and I started a church on a Sunday morning. So what I would do is I realized that there was like quite a lot of food insecurity, and I waitressed, and I saw so much food that was being wasted. I waitressed at a place called Late Night L's. It was a great, huge restaurant. So what I would do is I would fetch the food, and I would take the food in, and myself and Athalia would cook massive meals, and on a Sunday morning, I would run a Sunday school. And that's really how my life started in the life of the church. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. So I remember we had a concert, and then somewhere along the line they decided, well, better you get appointed to the Methodist Church was divided even very racially at that point, and they started doing something called geographic circuits. You might be familiar,
yes.
right? And with Germiston Methodist Church and Katlehong. You'll remember that. So anyway, so they put me in the team that was going to be part of that, and so I remember we were having a concert. So at Dickatoli, we were doing a concert, and so there was like this big thing. The kids at Dickatoli were going to do the concert at Germiston Methodist Church in the morning. And so I remember being such a nightmare to get the kids up there. And I'll never forget. So we came on the day, and it was really a stunning thing. And we were struggling. And I think the reality is that so often we find ourselves in difficult spaces. And sometimes we don't always have the language, and paternalistic and colonized concepts just inform everything. But I remember the day we had Joseph, and I'm going to swear now, guys, and I know you're going to have me for this, but I'm going to, okay. So anyway, Joseph arrives for the day, and he's got this T-shirt on, and so, I'm so busy, and the deal, everybody gets to look like they're from the Middle East, so we put a turban, weird turban on people's heads, and, all inappropriate stuff that we were doing. But I remember sitting in the front, and I hadn't really looked at his T-shirt, Anyway, so on the day, he's got on his T-shirt, this is no jokes, eat shit and die. And so the whole day, that's what Joseph wore. And I was like, oh my goodness. So yeah, I suppose.
And that's for the concert.
Oh, that was for the concert. And he was Joseph all the day, and everybody had to watch, eat shit and die. But the fact is that that's what it was, right? So that was my life, so that was kind of my teenage years. So
amazing. And how did the people around you take this? Because I can imagine, you speak to Gen Zs today, for them to stand up for issues around justice is a no-brainer, but how would that have been when you were a teenager?
Yeah, I suppose that some people thought of me as a troublemaker or a loudmouth or so opinionated, or that was the kind of rap that you got.
Sure.
It was also I kind of was trying to find my feet as well.
Sure.
I also wanted to try and find an expression of justice and compassion in the life of the church. I was at Wits, then I kind of went from school. So my school life was figuring out something doesn't feel right here. I remember as a teenager, so I'm the older sister, my sister Leslie is just 13 months younger than me, and then Lindsay is 7 years younger. And I remember, like, there's pressure on the oldest child in some ways, but I always remember feeling something's just not okay. Something's not okay. And, kind of driving past Sharpeville as a kid, kind of getting like a sense of, things weren't okay, but also like things weren't even okay in our schools. Things were not okay, some of the things that we went through. But I suppose it's like, how do you become awakened to, what is life all about? And I suppose, for me, I thought, well, the only thing I could really do is study law and do, human rights law. But ultimately, I found myself in the church and realized that I wanted to make a difference in life. And that's that is an ideal that we hold to. And, we came from a past that had shattered the humanity of one another. And, I find that is still the ongoing narrative, Yeah.
And the people around you in terms of sometimes when we decide to go on this journey of discovering who we are, it does not always fit into the narrative of the community that we grow up in.
Yeah.
And how did you navigate that? Because I can imagine, from being this good girl and to becoming this troublemaker.
Yeah. I think it's like, I'll never forget. So it was sort of, I got my license in my matric year, and I really did have a really dilapidated car, but like dilapidated beyond dilapidated, like beyond. It's a Mazda, and it was really horrific. Like we actually physically painted it with paint. But I remember, so we used to go, because remember I said I was now part of this, like I was this team, and so I had an opportunity to go into the townships, which was really like, people don't actually realize it wasn't something that happened. It's like you didn't make that distance. So I remember going often to St. Paul's and going into Katlehong and going into Tukoza and going in. And actually at times I was working with the Wesley Guild, because that was the interface that I was with. And that's when I was actually formally inducted as a guilder, actually. I was a proper, I've never been any other part of an organization, the church, but I was a proper guilder from then. Like properly inducted and everything, went on trial, the whole bit. And I remember like going into the township and like literally we would like smuggle people in. There would be snipers on the road, and it was, we would actually dart from one place to the next. And so I remember those times, I remember at Wits, like, obviously when I was studying law and really got conscientized to end conscription campaign and that time. So it's like, it's a time you're a product of what you grow up in, and you're trying to balance it. You're trying to figure it out, So it's like, definitely, I have a very vocal family, a very expressive family. One thing we were always allowed to do is express our opinions. So, we were allowed to express. And so maybe I was known as the radical person. I never felt radical. I never felt radical enough. I never felt it, So, it's kind of like, and also ultimately the cause does not, sometimes the cause can actually, deviate from the real essence of a person's humanity. You can believe in a cause, but actually dehumanize people even in that process. And I suppose for me it was, well, maybe the church is the place that can humanize us, that can actually make us be the expression of the body of Christ, made in all diversity. And so, that's been part of my journey.
And if you were parenting someone now like Jacqui Rivers, let's say you put yourself, what are some decisions that you'd make in terms of like, would you allow them to take that risk? Would you allow them to go on a risky path of realizing their own identity?
100%. Like, I think that, what I love about 21st century and the Gen Zs, the millennials, the whole bit, the why, I love the courage of young people. I feel that, I don't come from a silenced generation, but a silent generation, but a silenced generation. I think we carry a lot of silence and we carry a lot of secrets. I think that South Africa carries secrets. I'm of the generation that I think still carries secrets, secrets of the shame of our past in this country, and just secrets like, and trauma, quite a bit of trauma. I would allow my children even now to be more radically informed. That's what I love about young people. It's like, sometimes I go to synod and I listen to the debates, and I love actually sometimes like cruising through various social media platforms. It's good to see the radical footprints of young people, and I think that I wouldn't silence that. Sometimes it's irritating beyond.
Sure.
But I feel like we have to hear the voice of young people, just express themselves, and I think that there's I would let young people be more expressive, allow a more voice, push the boundaries even further, because I think it helps.
I could not agree more. But now, speaking of young people, so I said to our teenagers just before I came here, I'm having a conversation with Jacqui. And this conversation is aimed at your parents. So what are some things that you would love to hear Jacqui give input on, for the benefit of your parents? So they gave me a long list.
Okay.
And in as much as I'm a parent of a toddler, I think my age was also exposed, even though my son is still a toddler. But I was like, whoa. Okay. I'm not sure.
You're making me very nervous now, Hloni. Let me hear these questions.
Okay, so the first one is, so some of them are not questions, but maybe statements, and then you can just reflect on that.
Yeah.
So they are tired of their parents saying, I was not like this when I was young. Yeah. So obviously this is around identity choices.
Yeah, I know. It's like, I'm in that phase now where I'm like waiting for grandchildren, right?
Sure.
And so I'm kind of like in that I'm not in that exhausting toddler stage or taxing teenage stage or like young adult stage. They kind of are, Rebecca and Daniel are a little bit older now, and I have Chris added into the mix. So I suppose there is. I think one of the big secrets about parenting is actually most of the time you haven't a cooking clue what you're doing, And I think that sometimes like your easiest response, sometimes there is a clarity of what you're doing. But sometimes your response is like, I'm actually out of my depth here. And maybe that's where that kind of response comes from. You can't rationalize with a teenager of like, well, I don't quite actually know exactly how to deal with this. But sometimes I think it's a reflection of our own challenges. We bought a book. We bought a book called, Gary and I bought this book, and it was called "Have a New Kid by Friday."
Okay.
And we were desperate. We were bringing up teenagers. We were desperate. And I remember reading the book, and let me tell you, this book offended Rebecca. She was like furious. Like she just like, I have a new kid by Friday. And so I suppose like there are all times where you would like a new kid by Friday, and they've like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's, I think it's just do the hard yards, and that's okay. Like I think it's the secret code for like, I just don't know what I'm doing here. And that's why, we reflect back, we mirror back. It was like, it wasn't like this for me, so I don't know.
I could actually believe that, honestly speaking, I was reflecting with friends and later with my sister, and we're looking at our young sibling and we're like, she's like the fourth kid. Our parents had an idea what they were doing with him. Whereas with us, you can see that we're like.
So my mom. Okay, my mom, I absolutely love my mom to bits and my dad, but my mom was 20 when she had me.
Sure.
Okay, and she was 21 by the time she had my sister. And so, she was a young mom. Like my mom and dad were like, by the time I went to grade 1, my mom was like 26 and my dad was 27. They were under the age of 30. Like, honestly, they didn't know what they were doing. I was just a couple of years older. And the truth is, so I often think back like that way, like actually sometimes you don't know, and not that age is a teacher, because sometimes age is an excuse for our actually bad behavior, but sometimes we're just growing up ourselves and we haven't learned that yet, and kids are there to teach us. Have a new parent by Friday.
Maybe someone should write a book in that. And then another statement they started hearing is when we were growing up, when we were growing up, my parents would not allow me to do this. And they feel like it kind of suffocates their ability to discover their own identity. Because the social agencies that would have formed and shaped your identity
Yeah.
back in the 1980s are not the same agencies that shape and form their identity now.
Yeah, I must say, like, there's so much agency, like, I think that, social media, the internet, this world connection. I mean, I think that right now we are talking into the context of what we're watching unfolding internationally around displaced people, around the migration of people, around the movement of people, around what's happening in the wars across the world. And I think that, opinion is formed. I think that with social media, with various platforms, whether it be TikTok or, like, I think the platforms move so fast that I'm even too afraid to actually determine a platform because, Discord or Slack, you name it, and you're gone. But the reality is there are platforms for expression, and young people express themselves. They form ideas, and their ideas are formed in a global world. And there is no way, my friend's daughter's just finished matric, and she did South African history. And I was interested to know in what they were taught in their syllabus, in their matric syllabus. So she was teaching the things that we lived through, and it was so interesting, just reflecting. I remember those last years in Wits, some of the stuff that we were going through, she was learning about. And so the fact is that, the world that we lived in is not the world that young people are, and so I think that parenting, I think one of the things that we often don't do is we don't counter-reflect parenting together. So maybe if I can say to parents, we borrow language from generations, and the borrowed language is when I was young, the borrowed language is my experience. So we borrow from our experience from the past, which is good. I mean, I think that that's good, but we actually need to think maybe more of our collective engaging. I am so for generational parenting. I was not parented just by my mother and father, but by my grandmothers, by a step-grandfather, by aunts, by uncles, and by great aunts and uncles and friends. So the parenting circle, which really is the forming circle, is large, but the forming circle is larger now. The forming circle are actually voices that are outside your own influence, outside where you're comfortable from a cultural perspective. So, best you get informed. So one of the best things to do is if you follow your kids on Instagram or wherever, just figure out who they're following and following the people they follow, because it's a good thing to do without commenting, because you need to see what's informing them. You need to broaden your own perspective. So I follow some people that I would definitely not have followed, but because Rebecca and Daniel have told me to, I do. And that's been good for me. Because I don't think you end your parenting cycle. I think you just share your information on a more equalized, because remember, parenting often feels like the balance of power is unequal. And I think that there is a settling into the power play. And I'm not in.
So true.
I don't like the manipulation of power.
No, but that's actually true. I can see my own relationship with my parents, that now it's almost like shared accountability.
Yeah, completely. And I like that. I mean, I enjoy the feedback loop.
Sure.
It's hard, but it's good.
Okay, so there's this one. I don't know. Okay. Well, let's start with this first. Parents, stop reminding us about our privileges. It's okay that we have them.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think every generation carries privilege and responsibility, because basically with privilege comes responsibility.
Sure.
So I think, the idea of privilege sparks all sorts of debate.
Sure.
We struggle with identifying our privilege. I don't know, we become defensive about it. It's almost like a response to our privilege. But I actually think there is a balancing scale, and the balancing scale is the rights that go along with privilege are the rights of responsibility. So it's what do you do responsibly with your privilege, right? Because sometimes, you can, privilege becomes a little bit like a consortium of how you maintain a new platform, because really privilege equals platforms of influence, or, how you exist in life. But actually maybe the counterbalance is actually responsibility. How do you live in an accountable relationship with your privilege? So it's actually not to, the reality is there is privilege, but the counterpart of that is, well, how do you live responsibly with that privilege? So, I think the binary idea, the either or, I think often I hear the game of the either or, it's the absolute statements. I learned as a parent, the biggest mistakes I've ever made are in my absolute statement. You will never do this and I will always do that. Those absolute statements really reflect more on our own inability to grow than in fact on our gift of the privilege of being a parent. So, maybe parenting, I wish I could reparent now, and I think that's why it's so good that when you get to be a grandparent, or when you get to have the opportunity of young people that you get to influence in a way in your life again, it's like you learn from your mistakes. And I think that's really the deal. So, I think privilege is a reality, and let's just accept it, and then let's just counter it with, well, how do I live responsibly and accountably with the
I like that, because our privilege blinds, the reality is that privilege does blind, and we need to apply this also to other forms of privilege. Because often we're only blinded to privilege that has to do with political benefits and all of that. Why do parents struggle to get the idea of sexuality as a spectrum? And respecting their children's preferred pronouns.
Yeah, I know. Hloni, I'm so happy you raised that, because it's a big one, And what I'm so overawed by at the moment is, in fact, the ability that this generation of young people have in actually living in the spectrum.